and we have seen him before, and that is Kenneth A. Clark, who is up for confirmation as the Associate Director of the Division of Adult Institutions, Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Mr. Clark, please come forward, and I just want to sort of set the stage here, and I think we can deal with this relatively expeditiously. Welcome back, of course, and as you'll recall, and all of you watching at home recall, on April the 13th, we had a very important discussion about how inmates are processed at reception centers throughout California, and of course the reception centers are under your supervision. Specifically, we talked about the use of the so-called COMPASS assessment and other assessments in particular. And we raised some concerns about whether there was duplication or any coordination between and among the various levels of assessment. We put your nomination over and asked you and the department to provide additional clarifying information about the different assessment tools, who gets them, what they measure, and are they duplicative? And most importantly, or as important given the fiscal situation, what they cost and how they were chosen. We have since received a very detailed response from Secretary Cate that we appreciate, and I want to give you an opportunity here this afternoon to summarize that response. Before you do, let me just say that it's my understanding that this is the first time that the department has in writing really flushed this issue out clearly and defined what these tools all are and how they will work together to make sure that they are properly assessing inmates, categorizing them, and ensuring that we are prioritizing our scarce rehabilitative services that are necessary if an inmate is going to serve their time and we're going to reduce the risk of recidivism. So, important issue. We appreciate you coming back. What have you learned, and what's different since the last time we talked?
Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the committee's questions. Secretary Cate provided a detailed written response on April 27th, which provided detailed answers to some of the questions. Some of the questions were the assessment tools, what are they, as you mentioned earlier, were they duplicative, and the costing for those tools. What we have provided is attachment A in that reply, and what I'm going to do at this time, with your permission, is to do a very quick overview of those assessment tools.
Terrific.
Very, very quickly, and just kind of highlight what they do and for the most part, where they are done at. So I'd like to proceed at that time, if I may.
Please.
The first two assessments I'm going to talk about are assessments which assist the department in predicting and controlling institutional violence. And the first one is the assessment of providing placement scores to the inmates arriving into the reception centers entering into the Department of Corrections. This is completed at the reception center, this test, or this assessment, excuse me, and it is completed annually on an annual basis thereafter. What it does, it protects potential for misbehavior of the inmate while he's in custody. So we try to predict how this inmate will behave while he's incarcerated and what type of housing he would need for placement in a particular institution. We use variables such as inmate's age at his first arrest, gang involvement, length of sentence, just to name a few. And what this does at the end of this process is it determines the security level that this inmate will be housed in as he proceeds to his institution, a general population institution where he will be doing most of his time. So that's what the placement score does. Another assessment that we do is custody designation. And what this one does is it's again completed when an inmate arrives at the designated institution after participating in the process in the reception center. So when they get to their designated institution, correctional counselor staff do an assessment to determine the inmate's potential to escape from that institution and any basic security needs. This, therefore, determines the type of supervision the inmate will require while he's at the institution. Just to give you a real quick example, you may have a low-level inmate who cannot go out to the public, out beyond the institution perimeter, because he may have certain types of behavioral patterns. So therefore, that determines what type of housing, what type of activities he can be in.
May not be a propensity for violence, but maybe a propensity to escape.
To escape or security, basic security issues.
Got it. Okay.
So those are the two that are done there. What I'd like to do is move on to different type of assessments that predict risk to reoffend, and also provide placement into rehabilitative programs. We have two of those at this time. We have the California Static Risk Assessment, CSRA, and we have the Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions, COMPASS, which is what we've been talking about. CSRA assesses the offender's risk to reoffend while in the community after parole. So once parole, this assists in predicting how this inmate will behave and the potential for them to come back into the institution.
And is this assessment given then at the end of an inmate sentence, or sometime, or at the beginning?
This is automated. So as soon as the inmate is incarcerated, this is information that is kept on file with the Department of Justice. So it's already collected. It collects information like arrests, history, et cetera. So it's static. It's information that's already on file.
So somebody's serving a 30-year sentence. This information is required at the very beginning of their incarceration to determine how whether or not they're at risk for violating parole 30 years from now?
It's done for every inmate automatically. It's placed in their file.
What's the cost of that?
That we're collecting right now, and we talked with Mr. Williams, and we're collecting that information, and we're going to be providing that to him.
Okay.
Also, this is the tool that we use to assess if an inmate can participate in non-revocable parole. It's this score that allows an inmate to participate in that program.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but again, just to clarify, because we want to understand this. This is given at the reception center or at the or at the institution where the inmate is sent?
This is compiled when an inmate automatically enters into the department. It's a
reception center.
Reception center. Correct.
This is reception center.
Right, and it's collected and it will follow the inmate throughout his career.
So low-level inmate might be eligible for alternative sentencing or revocable parole, and so you do this test to see whether or not they're potentially suitable for an immediate parole, if you will.
Right.
Is that right?
To participate in that program, correct. What it also does is it determines what inmates can participate in programs. What we try to aim for with this test or this assessment is trying to get the right inmates in the right programs. So the inmates we want to get into our programs are inmates who have a high risk to reoffend. So when they may be short to parole and have a high CSRA score, those are the ones we want to focus on because they're the ones that have the highest risk. A lot of times what happens in the departments is low-level inmates. We're providing our services to low CSRA score inmates. And so we want to try to get where bang for the buck, where we can get this inmate into the program to reduce that risk.
Go ahead.
Okay.
COMPASS.
COMPASS. This is, again, as I said, the Correctional Office Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. This is assesses and identifies an offender's criminogenic needs that are related to offenders' risk to offend.
What's the word? Criminal what needs?
Criminogenic need.
Genic?
Genic need.
Genic, of course, genic. What does it mean?
Right. What that does is it takes factors in an inmate's personal life, personal factors, and how do those factors contribute? What issues in those factors contribute to him reoffending? For example, does he have a supportive family? What's his educational level? His propensity to reoffend. So they categorize it more on a personal level for that inmate. And then what we try to do with this assessment is get them in the program that's best suited for them to affect those certain criteria. So it breaks it down on an individual basis for an inmate, and you can take a look at that profile and see what areas the inmate needs to work on to reduce his chances of reoffending, and to provide him with programs that best suit that. Okay. These assessments are completed in the reception center, and for those that we have not completed, we are starting to do it in the general population inmates at this time. So we're starting the process of doing them in the field. We have also secondary assessments that we categorize as the test of the test of adult basic education. We call it the TAPE test. And what this does is it assesses the inmate's skill levels in areas as reading, language, and math. So it does what we do with this test is find out exactly how and where they're at, their level. It's almost like a report card maybe from a student. So an inmate may have an 8th grade reading level and a 4th grade math ability. So it again individualizes exactly where the inmate is in the 3 primary areas of education and what services they need to work on. This is done in the reception center, and then on an ongoing basis after that, as the inmate gets into a program or does self-help programs, they're tested on an annual basis. Another test or assessment is the Comprehensive Adult Student Assessment System. It's called CASAS. This is done when the inmate actually gets into a program. And what this does is it, again, assesses basic reading, listening, math, writing, and what it does is it determines how the inmate can use those skills in a functional context. So to put that into terms we could all understand, if this person can do math, how well can he keep a checkbook? Something that someone would do on a daily basis. How does this translate into how this inmate can use this on a day-to-day basis like we ourselves use these type of skills? There's an Addiction Severity Index, ASI. This assessment is completed for inmates who participate in a substance abuse treatment program and is given within 10 days that they enter that program to determine the severity of the inmate's addiction. Okay, and this is done, again, when they're in the program. We have the Parole Violator Decision-Making Instrument, PVDMI. And this allows staff to more consistently impose sanctions for parole violators. It structures the sanctions that inmates get when they do commit parole violations. In the past, there was a tendency that it was kind of left up to the parole agent. This is more of an attempt to standardize it across the board. The last couple I'm going to just kind of wrap up as one. We do medical screenings. We do mental health screenings. We do developmental disability screenings and dental screenings. All these are done at the reception center, and the purpose of this is to assess the inmate when he arrives in the reception center, find out his needs in all those areas, and then to place him at an institution where those needs can be met and followed up on by the correct staff. All these are court-related assessments. Obviously, medical screenings is Armstrong and Plata. Mental health is Coleman. Developmental disability is Clark. And dental is Perez. So these are all driven by the court. Obviously, the Secretary's letter is much more detailed in these assessments, and I'm happy to answer any questions I can regarding that. One of the questions asked that I would like to end with is it duplicative? I think that's an important question. But if you take a look at each one of these assessments, you can tell it takes a different aspect of an inmate at a certain time and place and determines what's the needs in different areas of that this inmate needs to best serve him and in the long term, hopefully reduce recidivism. At this point, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Members, Senator Harman.
Oftentimes an assessment is perhaps no more successful than the person that's administering the assessment. And so I'd like to get a little information. Are there correctional counselors that administer these tests? Or some of them sounded to me like maybe it was just, multiple choice. They're given a questionnaire and put an X in the boxes that apply, and that's it? Or are these one-on-one where a counselor is administering the test? And then the follow-up question as to the ones where a counselor is administering the test, I'd like to know a little bit about the qualifications, training, education of the counselors that are in fact administering these tests.
Okay. The tests that I laid out, I believe there's approximately 11, 12 to that extent, are all conducted by different levels of staff, depending upon the test, obviously.
Are they one-on-one, or do you bring a whole busload? Or
It depends on the test. For example, a TABE test, a test of adult basic education, it's a fill in the blank,
Okay.
kind of a multiple choice.
Sure.
And you could do it to mass quantity
Sure.
of inmates. Obviously, medical is one-on-one, interviewing the inmate and such as that. What you're referring to is probably the correctional counselors, one that they're involved with, which would be the first two that I spoke about.
Okay. So let's focus on those counselors and tell me what their education, training, background is that qualifies them to be administering these types of assessments.
Sure. Part of their education requirement is while they're not required to have a college degree, they are required to have so many units of education. And I believe it's approximately 60, and I may be wrong. I can get the exact number for you on that. A lot of times this is staff that started out as correctional officers, but they don't have to necessarily start as correctional officers. They can be educators. They can come from a variety of areas. And they do have a correctional counselor academy here at Galt. So once you get selected to be a correctional counselor, you do have kind of like we call it the correctional officer academy. You do have training as a correctional counselor as well. A lot of it, they get paired up with mentors in the field. They have a correctional counselor 2 supervisor who is responsible as well for teaching them on the job. So that's kind of the background of a correctional counselor. Some of the tests require interviews. A lot of them is actually file review. You have to be able to understand and know your way through a file and pick up that information. There's actually score sheets that you plug this information into, and then compile it, and at the end it gives you a score. So I hope I'm helping and answering your question there. So you work through it. Now, there may be questions from time to time to get clarification, but in these type of things, especially in the first two, you have to be real careful what the inmate tells you. Obviously, if you're trying to determine what type of housing unit or what type of security risk, it needs to have really documented data that's really black and white, that is very detailed, and you go off that information. You'd be limited in what you'd ask an inmate to a degree, but there could be particular parts that you would ask.
Other members? Senator Fuller, Senator Alquist, Senator DeLeon? Yes.
A comment and then 2 questions. First of all, thank you for coming back and answering these questions. As one who does have a master's degree in counseling from Washington University in St. Louis, it was a rigorous 18-month program, many, many hours. And just would want to say that I don't know all the details, but I certainly hope that all of the men and women who are in this position, are really trained thoroughly. And then 2 questions to you. One is that it sounds like not all of the assessment is done in the reception center. And so following from that, 2 comments, because it seems to me probably most all of it should be done there to most efficiently have a safe environment for everyone, and when possible for the inmates to actually learn to read and various things like that. So what kind of checklist do you have on any given day, just to look at, for any given inmate, how many of the tests they've really done and what those assessments are. So how easily time sensitive can you pull this information up and know exactly what you've done assessment wise and what is left to do? That's the first of the two questions.
Right. Most of the, and to kind of for your first comment, then I'll go into the question itself. Most of them are done in the reception center. Some, like the one I talked about, where we spoke about the custody designation. You wouldn't want to do that at the reception center because a lot of that's based upon the design and programs at the facility. So you want to leave that up to the general population institution's warden or correctional counselor team to decide where's the appropriate, where does this inmate. So we try to use a little user-friendly for the institution. Your next question, I think, is an important question because I believe the last time I was here, I talked about the importance of being able to move inmates through reception centers relatively quickly. The shorter time they're there, obviously, the less issues you're going to have with that inmate, and the quicker they can get on and start their programs, family visiting, etc. Correctional counselors, for the most part, have caseloads where they work these inmates through. So they have their cases as they work through the reception center, and they track what needs to be completed. I can go to any pretty much area and say, how many have you tested? Why are you behind? What is going on if I was the warden at that institution? I could go to education. What are your tape tests? Where are you at? What's your on an individual basis, rarely would I look at an individual inmate and say, where is he at? Unless he becomes a problem, like why is he there? We have lists of how long that inmate is there. Let's say we have an inmate there that we take, it comes up on our list where he's been there over 90 days, 100 days. We go back and say, okay, what is this individual's problem? But we try to do it as a whole. Are we ahead percentage-wise on our grouping as we're going through and moving them through the institution?
My point that I was trying to get at with that particular question is that I would think in your position that on any given day, you need to be able to go into any of the prisons and say, hey, I want to pull up so-and-so's record and see how many of the 20 assessment tools, how many has this person been given, so we really know how to deal with him or her. So that's the first question. The second question is, as a corollary, do you have the database to support what I'm talking about, computer-wise?
We do it in a different way. We don't do it for the individual. What the database that I use is I do length of stay. I can take an average of the average inmate at that institution and see how long it takes for that inmate, an individual inmate, to go through, how long it's taken for him to get through the classification process and get endorsed for an institution. I can look and see what it takes for that average inmate to, once endorsed, to actually get a bus seat and a bed at another institution. So that's how I manage it. I manage it, again, at the higher level as a group. Now, we get lists of inmates who are there for an extraordinary long time. So I can get a list of inmates that are there 100 days, 120 days, and contact that institution and require them. What's the issues? A lot of times it's waiting for a bed. A lot of times it's a medical issue, waiting for a medical bed. But you need to keep the institution focused on those outlying individuals and make sure they're the ones that start lengthening your statistics.
Hopefully,
so we do it in that manner.
Hopefully my last comment. What I'm requesting is that you work on the kind of computerized database system that allows you, in your position, to pull up any individual to see what kind of assessments they have had done, what they need to do, what those assessments show, and then as part of that, add to, after they leave, do they come back into the system? So what I'm really getting at is, how can we make the database system easier to see that people don't come back? And that will be done through education. It will be done through proper assessment in a timely fashion. And then comparing that to, if they get into trouble again, why, and being able to use that so that hopefully California, and this is my request to you to work on this. Do I have that?
I'll take a look at it, see what we can do in our capability to do that.
And good, and if you could respond to me later. For now, I'm going to assume that you are going to try and work on it.
Yes.
Thank you.
We heard public testimony, I think, the last time, so I don't think we'll call for public testimony unless there's anybody out there who wants to add anything from last time. Nope? All right. Mr. Clark, I appreciate your responsiveness and the responsiveness of the department. I know that your testimony and Director Cate's letter together are very detailed and answer, I think, most of the questions. There are several questions that we have asked as a follow-up in the form of a letter that I have sent to Director Cate regarding training, regarding some of the cost issues around Compass. And I know that in conversations with the department that we'll get answers to those. So I'm prepared to move your nomination forward to the Senate floor today, or at least recommend that to my colleagues. And we'll await those answers. I'm confident they'll be satisfactory, and then we'll take your nomination up on the floor of the Senate. All right? So I'm prepared to move the nomination here today to the floor. Welcome. Moved by Senator Alquist. Please call the roll.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon? Harmon, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I hope you found it an enjoyable process. I'm sure you have.
Very interesting.
But no, I'm going to say a great example again of why the process is so important. Not only to assess the qualifications of a particular nominee, but also in the appropriate way to help improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the particular operation. It's the way it should work. And I want to thank our SOR staff as well for their very good work in helping bring some of these issues to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Very good. All right. We do have two nominees. Well, let me do it this way. We've got file items 2 through 5. Are there any particular concerns, questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are. If we could separate the item number 2 and vote on them separately, and likewise number 4.
Okay. Let us then take file item 2. Let's do 2B here. First, Renee Lahner is a member of the Board of Behavioral Sciences. We'll have Senator Alquist make that motion, if that's all right, and please call the roll.
Senators Alquist? Alquist, aye. DeLeon? DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon? Aye. Harmon, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
It's 5-0. Nancy Anton is a member of the California Student Aid Commission. Any discussion, or just want to... Senator Alquist moves again.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? No. Fuller, no. Harmon? No. Harmon, no. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
That passes 3-2. Let's take then file items 3 and 5 together. It's moved by Senator Harm. I'm sorry. Did you want to separate out? You're good? Okay. 3 and 5 together, moved by Senator Harmon.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon? Harmon, aye. Steinberg? Aye. Steinberg, aye.
All right. File item 4, SCR 44, designating May 2011 as Foster Care Month. Which Senator Liu is this, by the way? Carol. Okay. Good.
Senators Alquist? Alquist, aye. DeLeon?
Yeah.
DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon? Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
That motion passes 4-0. Do we have any walk-ons or anything else to come before the committee? No executive session? Yeah. All right. Well, it's been fun. Thank you all very much. We'll stand in adjournment.